like the way you conflated Lamb Looney. Help Pastor Lamb Looney. The two are becoming one. That's a little weird. That is what I'm preaching on, though. We're all becoming one. Hallelujah. All righty. 1 Corinthians. Pick up on our study here. And we're going to need somebody to read for us. 1 Corinthians 12:31 to 13, end of the chapter. Keith. We got half the church behind the soundboard. What are you guys doing back there? You got a party or? Good night. How many Potter's House people does it take to screw in a light bulb? Hallelujah. And we'll get to a bunch of scriptures, but we'll go ahead and work our way through the introduction. We've been looking at 1 Corinthians 13 and coming to grips with the one essential, indispensable characteristic of the church, which is love. And we cannot claim to be Christians if we are not practicing love and developing love and seeing to it that it grows in our lives. In other words, I don't think we're ever going to nail it until we see him. When we see him, we'll be like him. Until then, we're kind of work in progress. But it's what we're striving for. We're striving for this love that is described for us, and we have to keep working at it. You can't just think that because you've read 1 Corinthians 13, you got it nailed. It doesn't work that way. This is something that we're going to see you have to practice. And so we're picking up now in verse 4, and we're going to start looking at the definitions. But before we do that, let's go ahead and read the text. 1 Corinthians 12:31 to the end of chapter 13.
I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things.
Okay, and so we're starting in verse 4 now, which was where Paul actually made the definition of love. And he uses 15 verbs to talk about love. Every word that he uses to describe or define love is a verb. And so David Garland suggests that Paul appears to be emphasizing the active and decisive character of Christian love. Love, he says, is dynamic and active, not something static. He's not talking about some inner feeling or emotion. Love is not conveyed by words, shown by, it has to be shown. It can only be defined by what it does and does not do. Love can only be defined by what it does and does not do. So love isn't thinking nice thoughts about each other. Love isn't having the verse out of 1 Corinthians 13, the greatest of these is love lacquered on a piece of pine hanging in your kitchen. Okay, that's not love. Love is something that you either do or you don't do. There are things he says love doesn't do. It just doesn't go there. It just doesn't do it. And there are other things that love is required to do. You have to involve yourself in these things. And so this is what we're going to be working our way through for the next few weeks, is these verbs that are drawn out by Paul. And so we mentioned this last week. The word for love is agape. It's a word that Paul coined. It had very, very minimal usage in classical Greek. There's only one or two examples of it. And beyond that, it just wasn't a word that had made its way into the Greek language. So Paul co-opts the word and embeds it in the gospel, and he uses it throughout his epistles. And he is emphasizing or making the point that this isn't any common love. This isn't love that people refer to. This is a completely different kind of love. And so Raymond Creed writes in his book, Is Our Love Biblical? Defines agape this way. Agape love is benevolent, charitable, compassionate, selfless affection, or more specifically, the truth respecting godly spiritual love, which can only result from being filled by the Holy Spirit. So let's just quickly run through his definition. We're going to look at Paul's definition, but it's worth unpacking what Mr. Creed has to say about it. He says it is benevolent. Okay, so the definition for benevolent is characterized by or expressing goodwill or kindly feelings, desiring to help others. That's what benevolent means. We've heard of benevolent societies. We've heard of perhaps benevolent dictators who are ruling in the interest of their people. The whole idea is it is a heartfelt desire to help others. We look at people, how can I help them? Benevolent. Charitable, that means generous, not only with money, but with our take on people. You have to be expansive when you think about people. You can't be narrow-minded. You have to be, the big word is magnanimous. That means you have a big heart, and you're able to embrace all kinds of people that you wouldn't habitually run with without agape working in you. But because you have this kind of love, you have this kind of charity, this open-heartedness to people. Compassionate, the definition for compassionate is having a sympathetic consciousness of others' distress and a desire to alleviate it. Okay, and so a sympathetic consciousness would be empathy. We're going to be looking at that, but it would be the ability to feel what people feel. And that takes development. That takes experience to be able to interpret people, to interpret the body language and the meaning behind their words, and getting to know people takes time. And you never really know that person until you've, walked a mile in his shoes, right? You've spent time trying to absorb the dynamics that have gone into that life, into that person. So that's what compassion is. Compassion is this empathy, and it moves us into a desire to alleviate or to help someone's distress. So benevolent and compassionate share this action towards people's needs. Mr. Creed says this kind of love is selfless. I don't think that needs elaboration. Selfless means it's not about me. Affection. Now that's an interesting thing that he throws in there. We looked at the earlier definition, and Mr. Garland said it wasn't emotion, but the truth of the matter is there is emotional elements to love. That's all there is to it. You can't divorce it completely from our emotions. This isn't something that only Vulcans can do. This is something we have to do as humans, and we are emotional creatures. Being emotional creatures, we really should feel affection from time to time for the saints. When you're not hating them, you should feel affection for them. Right? Philippians 1:8. Somebody get that for us. Okay, Sam. And so it is an emotional response. And obviously you have to rein that in, especially given the dynamics of this generation and this culture, which emphasizes emotion over reason, over logic, over truth. Emotion is the final arbiter in this generation of how we respond. It's all about how I feel. Clearly, love goes beyond that. But love has to include that. Philippians 1:8.
For God is my witness, how greatly I long for you all with affection of Jesus Christ.
Here's Paul talking about his affections and a deep longing. That's an emotional statement. He's not just saying, well, I think about you guys every now and then. He's talking about something that is very much a part of him, of his emotional makeup, his character, what he thinks about, what he gives himself to. So I believe that's a part of what we're discussing. And we're going to see all of these things. See, this Mr. Creed did a very lengthy study of 1 Corinthians 13, and he came to this conclusion based on the verses we're going to be looking at. So we're going to dig deeper into all these things, but I thought it was a concise definition of agape. Then he makes the statement that it has to be embedded in truth. That love is truth. You can't lie in love. You can't misrepresent things and call it love. That's not love. And there are people who do this all the time. Well, I'm not telling the truth because I love you too much to tell you the truth. That's not love. It's got to be something that speaks directly. We talked a little bit about this last week, speaking the truth in love. Okay? He talks about it being godly and being spiritual. So all of this is outward. All of this has to do with a desire to meet needs. Okay? And it looks an awful lot like how God looks at us and acts towards us. All this compassion, benevolence, affection, selflessness. This is all really what God looks like. And so our love looks like the love of God. That's why we have gravitated to agape. That's why we use that word rather than eros or philios or some other word. Okay, so let's start digging into the verbs that describe how love acts. And the first of these is patience. Everyone's favorite word. Patience. Let's get some scriptures. Going to need Matthew 26:41. Keith, Rick, get me Mark 9:19. Going to need Acts 20:35. Richard, tomorrow get me Romans 14:1. Brittany, 1 Thessalonians 5:14. Dwayne, 2 Timothy 2:24. Ron, get me Proverbs 19:11. Adriana, get me Proverbs 15:18. Travis, get me Ecclesiastes 7:8 and 9. Sam, Romans 15:4-7. Ron, Ephesians 4:2. Somebody else over here, Herman, Colossians 3:12-13. I need 2 Thessalonians 3:5. Somebody else over here, Sam, did you already get one? No, we're not doing duplicates yet. Kanika, 2 Thessalonians 3:5, Matthew 18:22-35, Harold. And we'll go ahead with, we probably won't get through all those. That's the way it usually flows, but if we do, we've got some more. Okay, so patience. The word is macrothumeo, patience. And this would be patience towards people, not just patience with time. I mean, there is a general thought of patience. We've all heard the phrase, the difficult things take time, the impossible things take a little longer. The truth of the patient with stoplights, or you'll end up in a car wreck. We have to be patient with doctor's appointments. We have to be patient with a lot of things, but that's not really the patience that Paul has in mind here. Nor is he talking about perseverance or endurance. Many times you'll read as you work through, a lot of times when I'm studying stuff like this through, I'm working through all of the scriptural references to the word, and you'll find patience used. It's in specific reference to bearing up under persecution. And that is a different kind of patience, and therefore it wouldn't really fall into the context of a discussion of love. I suppose you could shoehorn it into the discussion. We talked about being martyred and hating those who are martyring you. I suppose patience being an element of love there, but I don't think it really fits. Really what Paul is talking about is being patient with the weaknesses of other people, with other people's problems. Now, if you don't have a problem at all, raise your hand. I want to know who you are. You don't have any problems at all in life. Your character is flawless. You have a sterling mind. Everything you think is good, and you walk on water. You have a very hard time taking a bath because you can't get into the water. Okay, you're detecting a note of sarcasm, I hope. And so the reality is that if you're going to love people, it's obvious that the first thing you're going to have to develop is patience with their weakness. Patience with the problems and the difficulties that people are able to generate. And when we think we've given someone adequate explanation and adequate instruction and they still don't get it, what's it require? Patience. And when someone tries to do something over and over and over and over again and they just can't do it, what does it require? Patience. Some of you are thinking a gun. No, patience. It requires patience. Amen. Sometimes weakness is a personality trait. It's something that's a quirk in a character. I mean, one of the most common weaknesses in human nature is forgetfulness, right? We all are forgetful. And, my wife is always accusing me that I'm forgetting things, and I can't remember why she says that, but she's always saying that I'm forgetting things. But it's fun because I get to throw it back at her because she forgets things too. And the older we get, the more we forget, which is really good because there's a lot of things that happened early in life that we need to forget. So forgetfulness has its value. But at the end of the day, forgetfulness requires patience. Oh, we got to go back to the house. I do this to my wife all the time. I forgot the computer. I don't remember till I get here. So she's got to drive all the way home, get the computer, and come back. I don't blame her for... I don't blame her. In fact, I appreciate the fact that she didn't kill me with that egg. And she hasn't killed me with anything else recently. Requires patience to live with me. Messiness is... Some people just, some people are like a place for everything and everything in its place. And some people are, anything is its place. Everywhere is its place. Everything has a place and it's everywhere. And you can try to get them to change that, but you probably won't win because it's woven into the way they think. And sometimes weakness is that. It's just woven into our personality. We all have different personalities, and every one of those personalities has a specific weakness. Sometimes weaknesses are the result of very bad experiences that set us up for failure. We can go through terrible things. We can go through molestations, and this leads to just a breakdown in the ability to have decent human relationships, or rejection, or failure that robs us of any sense of security or accomplishment. There's so many different things that happen to people in life, and it weakens them, it breaks them. I use the term often. We are broken people. And that brokenness is something everybody else has to deal with. We have to be able to be patient with each other's brokenness, with the fact that we're not all on the same page, and we're not all as whole as you are. Some of us are missing bits and pieces that are very important. And so you've got to be patient with people like this. I didn't read the book, but I read a title of a book that I thought was quite interesting. The title is Hurt People, Hurt People. Hurt people, hurt people. There's a lot of rage in people's lives. Dad leaves home. That's 50% of the children of this generation. You have no idea how much rage that puts in a child's life. But I've been counseling it for years and years. It angers them. They aren't good enough for Dad to invest in their lives. He has to go off, do his own thing. I think I shared with you once, I was sitting in a parking lot, turned on the radio, and there's this screaming song. The lead vocalist is just screaming at the top of his lungs. And he's screaming at his father. And he's just cussing him out, because he's just so angry, and it just comes out so viscerally in the song. And there's a lot of people dealing with that, right? And so things happen in people's lives that produce weaknesses and brokenness, and this is what we have to deal with all the time. Rick?
Hello. So me and RJ watched the Crossing the Switchblade last night, and afterwards I found Nicky Cruz's testimony. Right, he was like fresh off of the whole thing, and like he was broken because his mother she was really a witch, and she would lock him in a room for 3 days with no food and water, and he was just so hurt to the point where he tried to commit suicide at 9 years old, and that led him to the streets of New York, and he hurt people, joined the gang, and his, and within 6 months he became the leader of the gang because he was so hurt in himself that he just wanted to put that hurt on other people. And then the interesting thing was, what got him was David Wilkerson. He had the compassion. He seen the newspaper article of these guys, and God put it on his heart, go work, reach out to them. And he had the compassion to the point where he was weeping. He went out and he reached these guys with love. And he wouldn't let up on Nicky Cruz, and every time he seen him, God loves you and I love you. And it tormented him so much because that love was inside of him, but he'd been hurt so much that, he was having this battle. And ultimately, that's what got him, was the love, and the final sermon in the movie was all about love. Exactly what we've been talking about all this time was the love, and it got all of them. And Nicky Cruz said his buddies were on the floor crying and crying and crying because they never had that love, you know, and they've been full of rage and hurt their whole life and hurting other people. But then when that love overpowered them, they couldn't contain themselves.
Yeah, ultimately. Love triumphs over all is the old saying. But when you're talking about the love of God, that has a supernatural dimension. And that's what affected all of us. I mean, ultimately, that's what hooked us like dogs, is we encountered the love of God in a very real, tangible way. And we knew it. From that point on, I didn't know anything about the Bible, but I sure knew that God loved me. And that was all I needed to know. Alex, let's get a mic over to Alex. And so sometimes weakness is the result of sin. And obviously sin destroys our character, but you run into people who are addicted and who are filled with bitterness and unforgiveness. And sometimes sin is conquered instantly upon conversion. There were sins in all of our lives that vaporized. We got saved, boom, it was done. I was done drinking. I was done doing drugs. I was done. I didn't go back. It was over. But there are other sins that sometimes take a lifetime to get delivered from. You're fighting against these things day in and day out. You wonder, why can't you do for this what you did for this? But I don't know. Why did God leave some of the enemies in the land of Canaan? Right? To teach Israel how to fight. So there are dynamics, and I can't explain it all. All I know is that when we're dealing with each other, when we're dealing with people, sometimes that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the effects of sin in their lives, and we all know that we're all sinners. And so chances are good you know full well what I'm talking about in your reference points, the things that you go on battling as a Christian, right? There's no hearty amens there. We're all hunkering down. We all put our helmets on and said, oh, no. Now, this is the reality that we're dealing with. And so if I'm going to love you, if you're going to love me, we got to be able to process the effects of a wicked, wicked thing that Adam introduced into the species a long time ago. And we've been fighting with it ever since. Alex.
Yeah. There's a lot of patience in training. And I found out that, especially with kids you got to have a lot of patience. And I know everybody in here that's a parent has exploded on their kids. You know, I mean, you can only take so much. How much patience can you have? You know? And I know that I've been practicing patience, but there comes to a point where, you know, enough is enough. And, you know, when you're in training and you're training up your children or you're training somebody for something, you have to have a lot of patience because they don't understand or they're just rebellious. They just don't want to do it.
Right.
And the only way that I have found to conquer that is with God's patience. The fleshly patience doesn't work. It has a level, right. and that's it, you know. And the fruit of the Spirit is the place where the manifestation of love is flowing through us and in us. And when we get it flowing in us and through us and recognize Galatians 5:22, wherever we go, you will see love in action. But our flesh is always battling us. And there's degrees of, you know, you're growing in it. And I find it really tough to grow in. I mean, you have to correct yourself. You know, finally you see yourself. And usually when you settle down and you lose control, you look at yourself and later around after the situation, oh man, what did I say? What did I do? You know? And then you say, oh, I got to correct this. How am I going to correct this next time?
Right.
And that's how I believe you grow, is when you see it a little later, little conviction comes on you.
Yeah, clearly this is all, like I said, a work in progress. But it clearly, we're going to see, it depends on God. And that's what Creed's definition included, that it came by the Holy Spirit. This is fruit of the Spirit. The start of the fruit of the Spirit is love. Included in the fruit of the Spirit is long-suffering. So, it all ties together. We understand that as you read the letters of Paul, these themes keep reoccurring and keep cropping up because they're truth. They are the basis of truth. So here we are, and we're called to this love. And this love requires us to work with people and work with their sin and work with their problems. Let's get a mic over here to Ron. And you think about the prodigal son. How long had the father been standing there waiting? While the son was still far off, the father sees him. He was watching. He's always watching for him. And so he was gone for quite some time, but the father's heart never changed. In all that time, he never let bitterness win the day. He never let his anger get a hold of him. He just patiently waited and waited and waited. And that's, obviously the parable is a picture of God, right? But it's also a reference point for us. This is the kind of God love that we're trying to create. To have that kind of patience. What do you do when your spouse won't get saved? Right? What do? Mel's got an idea. Somebody get her a microphone. I want to hear this. What do you do when your kids go off the rails and they don't want to live for God? What do you do in these situations where someone embraces sin willingly and they know better? And they know better, right? Mel.
Not everybody needs to really take this example, but I got saved, and Gary didn't get saved for almost 10 years. So about the middle of that, I would ask him all the time about getting saved. I asked him why. One time he's sitting there reading the paper, and I said, "Hon, why is it," I'm sitting over on the couch, he's in his recliner, "that this horrible nightmare of a thing beats on our door, and you go and answer it, and you go, 'Oh, you want to speak to my wife.'" He'd put the paper down, listening to me, and then he'd just put the paper back up because he knew I meant the devil. Why does he leave all demonic things up to me? So about halfway through, I'd been to visit my sis in Prescott under good preaching. We didn't have a potter's house. I come home and I say, "Are you going to get saved?" And he said, "I'm fine." So then I said, "God, he is never going to get to saved. I want to pack up these young men, move to Prescott under a good church and preaching. And so I think you should kill him." So about a month after that, with me asking God to kill him, I did learn that God does answer no. He always answers, but he does answer no. Gary was late home from work. I called the office, no answer. The evening went on. I had not a clue. He thought he had told me he had to work late. So I get the boys in the truck and I say, "Now, people can have wrecks, so I want you boys to check both sides of the road real good for me while I drive in the dark down this road," because I thought maybe he went off the road and God killed him. So we found nothing. I come home. He walks in the door about 9:30, and I go, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad to see you." He goes, "What?" So I repented. And then probably about 5-6 years later, he got so good and saved. And a number of times when I'm sitting at the organ, I see him ushering, and I go, "God, I'm so thankful.
But you didn't
I'm
kill him.
so thankful you didn't."
Yeah, amen. 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 We're not going to ask for a show of hands of how many of you prayed for the death of your spouse. But bottom line is God, God moves in mysterious ways, and he never honors our time frame. ever. I believe sometimes he simply says, oh, you want it now? Okay, later. Just to teach us, that we got to wait for him. Ron.
Yeah, I know Alex said, we got to be patient with our kids, but that's as children, especially we get grown, we got to be patient with our parents too, especially unsaved. I know I shared this with a couple of people, but, my dad just recently admitted, basically all his faults in his marriages and his relationships with, his kids and friends and family. He actually admitted that it was his fault, and he apologized. And, I've been waiting over 20 years for this, because before, you couldn't pay my dad to apologize for nothing. You were always wrong, and he was always right, no matter what. So when it comes to love, when he was, and this happened on Father's Day, and when he admitted to all that, like, it literally brought me to tears, because my entire life, I couldn't get an apology out of my dad, like, for nothing. Like, I was always wrong. I was wrong for leaving. I was wrong for going to church. I was wrong for getting saved. I was wrong for believing that I should be under, preaching, biblical preaching and discipleship and going to church. And now he's going to church. Now he's telling people about Jesus. Now we can have the same conversation about Jesus and the Bible and not be at odds about it or a difference about it. Now it's like, you know what, son, I'm sorry that I was prideful. I'm sorry that I messed up our relationship. I'm sorry for not talking to you for 4 years. I'm sorry for messing up the marriages and the broken relationships that you had and all that. The example that I was as a father, he was like, I'm sorry, and because I didn't follow Jesus and I didn't follow the biblical teachings that you've been taught for the past 15 years, whatever, it's my fault that I messed all that up. So it's like we have to have the same kind of love that our parents have. We're supposed to show our children towards our parents, especially if we want them saved.
Yeah.
If you want to see them saved, we got to have that patience and that humility towards them too. It's a two-way street.
So both of these stories end with the reality that to those who wait, right? That patience bears its fruit. And sometimes all you can do is just wait for God to get a hold of somebody. Think about Jesus. Think about his patience with the disciples. Matthew 26:41.
Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Jesus said that after he'd asked his disciples to just pray for an hour. Just pray for an hour. That's all I'm asking. He comes back and he finds them asleep. Right? And so he didn't start kicking butt and counting bodies. He just says, I get it. The spirit was willing, but the flesh is weak. And you really need to pray because the devil's going to take advantage of your flesh. He's going to beat you with your own flesh. That's how you're going to lose the battle. So you need to learn how to pray to overcome the flesh. So the amazing that discipleship requires, the amazing patience that we have to be, that we have to exercise when we're working with new converts and people that are bringing all their baggage into the kingdom with them. Amen. They don't come in ready-made disciples. They don't come in understanding the dynamics. There's things we think they should understand right away. They don't. And you got to work with them and work with them and work with them. And then the most frustrating part is you could spend a year working with somebody and they never get it and they disappear. And that's really, really frustrating. And that's enough for you to say, I'll never do that again. But you got to do it again. And again. And again. And again. Because it's what love does. Right? Somebody get a mic to Elliot. Mark 9:19.
He answered and said, he answered him and said, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me.
There's a demon-possessed child. The disciples can't cast the demon out. So Jesus expresses, how long do I have to put up with this? So you know that he felt it the same way we feel it. He felt the exasperation. He felt the frustration. But what does he say? Bring him to me. Let's take care of this. Let's fix this. Okay? And so, when I read that sometimes I think, God himself in heaven probably has his moments when he says, how long do I have to put up with this? Right? But we're all still here. None of our seats are occupied with a little pile of ashes. That was the guy that we could never get through to. Right? There's always this long suffering. It's a great word, long suffering. That's what patience is.
Yeah, Pastor. You mentioned about, the patience, to make a disciple. And that jumped at me real quick because coming from the world, we get this corrupt image of love, and it comes from music, it comes from the movies, it comes from the family, it comes from the fall of this generation. And also, all that us coming, when we come to the feet of Jesus, when we hit the altar, still that thing is still like a dark, really dark, deep in your heart. In order, from my experiences, to let go of those characteristics, those flaws, the corruption, the lies, and really hone in on the brotherly love and the relationships that we build here, it takes a complete patience, like you said, and surrender.
And a lifetime.
And a lifetime, every day renewed. And just to end it on that, it just jumped at me, and it took me so long to get rid of those, because that was like deep in my mind. You're so used to watching soap operas and love, and you think that this is it. Once you really read the Bible and you're explaining it from the pulpit and you're breathing fire from there and you burned it all up and you're like, okay, yeah, this is not what I thought it was.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned the media and the way it presents life to us. According to the television, every problem in the world is solvable in a half an hour. You solve murder mysteries in a half hour. You solve epidemics in a half hour. You solve hurricanes in a half hour. Everything gets solved. That's all it takes, half hour. Give me a half hour, we can fix it. Right? It takes us a half hour just to drive across town. And it takes a lifetime of patience to become patient. Amen. Sam.
Yeah, you were talking about two enemies of ours, the flesh and the devil. Many of us here, and some are still learning, that if you give either one of them guys an inch, they're going to take a mile. And so we just have to, like you said, we have to learn by our mistakes and be patient. The victory is going to come someday.
And not everybody you give an inch takes a mile. Some of them only take an inch. You just gotta. One of the side effects that we got to be careful of all the time is cynicism. So we get cynical, and then we say, "Well, why bother? You give them an inch, they take a mile." We all have used that phrase. It's a very cynical phrase, because that's what we're expecting. We're expecting them to take advantage of us and to abuse us. Okay, and so is love is motivated by the welfare of a person, and therefore I'm willing to be patient. I'm willing to wait. I'm willing to keep reinvesting. I'm willing to keep pouring in, even though I'm rejected, even though the love that I'm trying to show you isn't received, isn't processed properly, and isn't bearing the fruit that I want it to bear. Love is patient about it. Love just keeps pushing the envelope. Love doesn't give up. It just keeps patiently waiting to see the fruit. We were talking about weakness and putting up with human weakness. Acts 20, verse 35.
I have shown you in every way by laboring like this that you must support the weak. And remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that he said, it is more blessed to give than to receive.
Okay, I've shown you the way I've lived, Paul says, that you must support the weak. That this is part of the package. You've got to work with people's weaknesses. Okay? And be that whatever those weaknesses may be. In that particular context, it might have been financial. Not really sure. That's what some commentators say. But at the base of it, the idea is this working with people's weaknesses. Let's get a mic over for Daryl here. Okay? Romans 14:1.
Receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to disputes over doubtful things.
Okay, receive one who's weak in the faith. All right? They haven't developed spiritual maturity. They're not processing legalistic issues correctly, or whatever it may be. In that case, it had to do with food. But there's different dynamics that we all face from time to time. And what Paul says is you've got to love people with their mindsets and mentalities, and you've got to work with them, and you don't receive them just to try to argue them into your perspective. He says don't receive them to disputations. Don't receive them and think that, I'm going to correct this person. There are a lot of things in life that people just have to work out. And you just have to let them work it out. And if you start fighting and debating things that are of no consequence, how is that love? How is that love? Love is the capacity to deal with people's weaknesses. And the more foolish their position, the more challenging it is to you. Because sometimes you talk to people and it's clear they haven't ever had two consecutive thoughts that made sense. They have no logical skills whatsoever. I listened to a man just the other day. He went from one point to the next point to the next point as if they were all a seamless thought, and not one of the thoughts were connected in any way. It was like, and this was a pastor. And I was thanking God I wasn't discipled by him, because I'd be in bad mental condition. But you run into people and you get it's easy to get upset with the breakdown in their logic and the breakdown in their thinking. And you know what? What do you say? How can you be so stupid? Isn't that what you say? That's what I say. I don't say it. I think it, which isn't a good thought, right? I have to rein that kind of thinking in. Because they see it differently and perhaps see it through a distorted lens that I simply cannot comprehend, that doesn't give me the right to denigrate their humanity, strip them of dignity, and just call them out stupid. You're just stupid. Right? Because we've all been stupid from time to time. Okay. So we're working with weakness. So receive one who's weak, but don't receive them to doubtful disputations. Daryl. Oh, sorry.
Actually, it's me. I'm just so short over
He's
here.
your right hand man.
Yeah, he's got a big arm. That's why I married him. So, this is hard. Years and years ago, Daryl was married to somebody other than me, which is a really bad thing to do before you get married to the wife you're going to be married to a long time. And she was a thorn in the flesh. From the beginning, she was a thorn in the flesh. And a thorn in the flesh can result in a really bitter life. So when I married Daryl, I also married his ex-wife, which is difficult. And I have been influenced, our whole marriage has been affected by that from the very beginning, because there's a child involved. And that brought all kinds of difficulties. And I could have just gotten more and more and more bitter over the years, because she's a very difficult woman to deal with in many areas. And the only recourse I had was to say, what does the Bible say about it? And it says to pray for those that despitefully use you. So I just made it a point to pray for her all the time. Now, I wanted to pray like this: God, please kill her.
Right, Mel's prayer.
Make her life totally miserable.
We're labeling that Mel's prayer. From now on, for anybody who needs a reference point, you have Mel's prayer. God, kill him.
Yeah. Yeah, but the Bible wouldn't let me do that. I'm sorry, Mel. And so I had to pray that God would save her and change her life and bless her and give her all kinds of, blessings and everything, even though I felt like I was giving her plenty of money to bless her life, and I was giving her every chance she could get, and there was all kind of other things involved in that too, but in the end, I just prayed for her, and I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed. And this is not something that just happens and it just ends after a year or two. You're not talking about something that's going to ever end. I mean, she's still involved in our lives because we still have the child. And over the years, she did not change in our lives. So this is, I still pray for her, and I still pray for his son. But we, after a period of time, things did settle down quite a bit. And she did claim to get saved. Whether she did or not, I don't know, because we don't have a lot of physical contact with her. But she does go to church. And we did get out under a lot of the issues that we were having with her, settled down and everything. And we do have now a bit of a relationship with his son, who we have not been able to have a lot of contact with because she prevented us from seeing him a lot and everything. But the big change it made was in me. Because the big change, the big change in, because I figure if you can get victory over your worst enemy, which was what she was, the thorn in my flesh, by praying for them, you can get victory over anybody by praying. And it becomes somebody that you actually care about. And you actually want to see them prosper. And when you see them and you say hello to them and you really care about them and you say, how are you doing? Are you doing well? And how's your life? And how are things going for you? And you can cry for them when they say, I have problems, and she lost a husband and she went through all this trauma and everything. And you feel for them. And there's somebody that you wanted to curse once before and wanted them to die. Then you know that God has changed you, and you know you can deal with anybody. Right. And you can love other people too.
Right. So Jesus said, pray for them that despitefully use you. And he didn't say that for their welfare. He said it for yours. He said it for the person who's being despitefully used. That's that. If you will listen to what he says and actually apply it, that's what I was waiting for in her testimony, was that there was the change that came in her. So the person she's praying for doesn't change at all, but the change is in her heart. What's happening? Love starts to prevail. Love starts to conquer. Love changes us. This is why love is the central, most essential thing of Christendom, of life. Is you've got to let love work itself into you, and it requires enormous patience. So here we are, years and years down the road. We still have the problem. It exists, but it's not a problem anymore because my heart's right. You can't change the problems. The only thing you can change is your heart. Right? So it's challenging. Let's get a mic over here to Corey. 1 Thessalonians 5:14. And while we're patiently waiting for that, somebody read us 2 Timothy 2:24. I gave that to somebody already. I gave both of these scriptures out. Are you on 2 Thessalonians? You're 2 Timothy. Go ahead and give us 2 Timothy. Does anybody remember 1 Thessalonians 5:14? I know I gave it to you so long ago that you've forgotten it. Yeah, Elliot can read it. Did I hear somebody say, oh, that was me? 1 Thessalonians 5:14. Was that you? Oh, you already read it? See, I forgot you read it. It was so long ago. No, you didn't. You lied. These Sunday schools can be so confusing. Somebody get me 1 Thessalonians 5:14. You do have it. Okay, but you didn't read it. Read it.
Encourage those who are timid. Take tender care of those who are weak. Be patient with everyone.
Okay, read it again. Go ahead. What translation is that? That's NLT?
I have no clue.
You have no clue.
I could find another one. It is NLT, yes.
NLT, yeah. Go ahead and read it again in the NLT.
Okay, brothers and sisters, we urge you to warn those who are lazy, encourage those who are timid, take tender care of those who are weak, be patient with everyone.
Okay, take care of those who are weak, be patient with them. Let me read it to you from the King James. Now we exhort you, brethren, warn them that are unruly, comfort the feeble-minded. I love it. Comfort the feeble-minded. The NLT has timid, but it's comfort the feeble-minded. Support the weak. Be patient toward all men. Okay? So what are we dealing with? We're dealing with the weakness, the mental weaknesses, the emotional weaknesses, the sin-caused weaknesses, the life experience weaknesses, all the things that have broken people. We are to deal with those things with patience. And 2 Timothy 2:24.
And the servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, patient.
So here's one of the qualifications. If you're going to pastor people, you have to have this patience. If you're going to minister to people, let's expand the application. It goes beyond a pastoral mindset because this is love that is required of all of us, and patience is the first verb in the definition of love. Okay, we gave a mic to Corey.
Hello. Okay. When you were talking about helping, extending your hand and helping people and being willing to keep helping people, avoiding getting cynical with, maybe sometimes they don't always work out. They don't stay. They don't stick it out. And I thought of the first thought that came to my mind was bigotry of low expectation. And I know it's been used in various ways throughout the years, but what I was thinking about it was, most people would say, hopefully, that, they're not racist. They don't, they think it's wrong to, categorize people that, maybe look the same or whatever, blah, 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 and they all think the same and they all act the same and all these different things, right? They'll say, I'm not racist, that's wrong. I treat people as individuals who think differently and act differently and make different choices, blah, blah, blah. But when it comes to approaching people that need help, aren't getting it, right off the bat and just, on fire, and placing that same mindset towards them that they're all going to act the same, they're all going to have the same outcome. Why invest in them? Why is it any different? Not to treat them as individuals. Maybe the last guy didn't stick it out, but you know what? I can't let it discourage me and think that put a blanket over every one of them. So there's no point in helping any of them because they're all gonna fall away. They're all gonna be a waste of my time. Blah blah blah. And I kind of wonder if it's we can say we're not one, but.
Well, it's an interesting thought because what that reveals is that racism and cynicism are kindred spirits. They are an attitude towards a people. Racism tends to be steeped in ethnicity. Cynicism is steeped in the problems that all people have. If you pulled racism out of an ethnic issue, you would be left with what? You would be left with, I'm skeptical of these people because of what? Sin. Because sin produces certain things in their lives. I'm skeptical of these people because of sin. It all keeps coming back to sin. We are a broken people. and sin takes its toll, and we have to be patient, regardless of how you quantify it, regardless of what word you may use to put a jacket on that lack of patience or that lack of love. It comes down to the same thing. It comes down to the same thing. Racism is an amazing lack of love, isn't it? How can I judge someone by the color of their skin, or by where they grew up, or what happened to them when they were 3 years old, or on and on and on and on and on. We love to put people into pigeonholes and set people up that way, but you can't treat people that way. You can't think about people that way. This whole thing, as you work through this, you're going to recognize that you have to change your mind about a lot of stuff. Just the way you approach things, the way you think about people. It's got to change if you're going to be a loving person. And if you're going to be a Christian, you must be a loving person. Okay, that's all we got time for. We'll pick it up next week.